Welcome. I'm really happy to be here. I thought I would just talk about the topic of family drama, struggles with family, because I know this is on my mind at this time of year. A lot of us are around our families, extended families, and I don't know about you, but that often brings up very challenging situations for me. And I think it's a thing that, like Ram Dass once said, like you've probably heard this, like, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. And it just kind of brings up all the issues that you thought you had overcome, It kind of drags you back into these old patterns. And so I wanted to ask myself, like, what exactly does Buddhism teach us about dealing with those situations? Because Buddhism tends to be this religion that rejects, it basically says the best thing you can do is like leave all that behind and go and become a monk or nun, which most of us aren't going to do anytime soon. The Buddha's son, his name is Rahula, which means obstacle or fetter, and he left in the middle of the night and didn't, snuck out and became a monk, and then later, after he became enlightened and started teaching, his wife and his, not his mother, it was his stepmother, I think she also became a nun, so that made it a lot easier for him. He left, and then they all kind of followed him into the monastic world. But it doesn't, explicitly offer that much in terms of what we're engaged in around the holidays. Like, you have to kind of look for that. So, this topic is like really on my mind all the time. And I was thinking, what can we take from Buddhist thought that will be useful? And I thought one of the things that we reject a lot in Western Buddhism is the notion of karma and rebirth. Like, we do like to talk about, rebirth in a psychological sense, and we'll often sort of interpret that to mean that rebirth happens in every moment, which I think is very much the case. But I think it's very explicit in the Buddha's early, we don't really know what the Buddha himself said, because nothing was written down until hundreds of years after he lived. But in the earliest Buddhist texts, there is no question that what he spoke about was actual rebirth, like being born, living a life, dying, and being reborn. And then, what is it that's reborn, right? So that's the thing that, like, a lot of us might have trouble with. We look at it as metaphysical speculation. We look at it as just something that isn't necessary, and it isn't in a way, but I do think it has some useful takeaways. So I just wanted to quickly explore that concept. If we can, like, if it's something that you have trouble with, just, suspend that for a minute, because dogma in throughout the Buddhist world has a different role than in the Western world. I think, like the Dalai Lama said once, someone asked him, what if science proved definitively that reincarnation was not real? And his entire identity is based on being the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. And they said, what if science proved that? And he said, we'd take it out. Just, he's not attached to that dogma. And Buddhist dogma doesn't play the same role that dogma plays and doctrine plays in other religious traditions. So if we can just suspend our discomfort with that or take an agnostic point of view, I think it's really interesting. So I want to mention what is the teaching of karma. One other thing I want to say, the Buddha himself did deal with some difficult family situations. He had this cousin, Devadatta, who would constantly try to disrupt what he was doing. He was jealous, and he tried to kill him several times. And he once sent a wild, enraged elephant to attack him, and the Buddha just kind of calmed the elephant with his loving kindness. So we all want to come into situations calmly and with loving kindness, right? And sort of calm things. How do we do that? Like Buddhism, we know that one of the things we can do is take deep breaths, right? Stop and be completely aware of whatever emotions we might be experiencing and be with them completely, not reject them and push them away. Those are all things that I think we all are aware of in practice. And so beyond that, I think the teaching of karma is useful, so in karma and reincarnation. So the Four Noble Truths, right? I think we're all familiar with those, but the idea that life is suffering, right, and that the cause of suffering is desire, right, and that it is desire, and that there's a path to the cessation of suffering, and that path is the Noble Eightfold Path. I think you're all familiar with those concepts. The idea that what reincarnates, right? A lot of people will say there's no reincarnation because there's no notion of an eternal self, so what could possibly reincarnate from one life to another? What Buddhism teaches is that greed, anger, and ignorance. Those are one way to put it. Like, it's this ball of basically desire and negative things that carry over from one life to the next. That doesn't mean everything in life is negative. It just means it's desire that keeps us coming back and coming back and coming back until we work out our issues. And we keep encountering the same kinds of patterns. And so I don't know about you, but like I find myself in these situations where things, they have this feeling, that they are not just, it's something very deep, right? And I think if you look at it that way, one of the things the Buddha said is that it's not easy to find a being who has not been your mother, your father, your brother, sister, son, or daughter. Like all of us in this room, the fact that this group of people are sitting here, I would say comes from connections from past lives. And this is also deeply part of Buddhist thought throughout Asia. It's just kind of taken for granted. And so I think that is an interesting way to interpret situations because they have very deep roots. What's happening to you if you have a difficult sibling, difficult parent, difficult whatever is going on, that could be not just something that's happening in this life or from your childhood, but it could be something that's happening from many lifetimes back. And I think that's kind of a liberating idea because it just tells us we're not dealing with an ordinary, okay, let's just like try to be calm. It's not that simple, right? How do we achieve calm if we know or believe that we are with this configuration of people from many lifetimes ago, and these are deep and old patterns? For me, it's kind of like I can't do that. So if I can't do that, what do I do? And that's one of the things I want to talk about. So there's a story that someone put on Facebook recently without its Buddhist reference, but it's actually a very early Buddhist story. You might have heard this. There's a young man came to the Buddha when he was like with his group of monks and teaching. A young man came and he was angry because one of his relatives, he was from the Shakya clan, the same clan as the Buddha, and one of the relatives had joined the Sangha and had left home. And so he was angry and he started insulting and shouting at the Buddha. And the Buddha said, he was, very calm, and he said, I want to ask you something. Do you ever have guests come to your house? And he said, yeah. And he said, when you have guests come, do you offer them food, drink, a place to sleep, and everything? And he said yes. And he said, okay. And what if they don't take your food or take you up on your offer? What happens to those things? And he said, well, those things stay with us. And he said, the Buddha said, okay, well, it's the same with insults. We do not accept your insults. We do not accept your yelling. We do not accept it, and it stays with you. And he wasn't saying it in a mean way, He was just saying, this is not coming into my world. It's part of your world. And I think he had a lot of compassion for this guy, and he remained deeply calm. And I think when we remain deeply calm, it helps the other person. That was the corollary of that story that the Buddha taught. When someone comes at you with anger, if you respond with anger, you're escalating the situation. But if you respond with calm, you're helping yourself and them because it changes the energy of the situation. So how do we do that? For me, in my world, that translates into boundaries, which is something that people talk about in therapy a lot, setting healthy boundaries. And I can just give you an example. Because for me, if I go into a situation and I'm finding that again and again and again it's frustrating or upsetting in some way, it almost always has to do with some issue of, I'm not doing that. I'm not saying hey, that stays with you. I'm allowing it to come into myself and I'm engaging in it and I'm reacting, right? So healthy boundaries could mean a lot of things. One thing is let's say someone raises their voice at you, you leave the room or whatever. That might be one thing. You just decide this person always starts shouting. I'm not going to engage in that. They raise their voice, I leave. That's an example of a healthy boundary, right? Or another example, this is kind of ridiculous, but my mom loves to bring her dog. It's a big golden retriever that's very rambunctious. She loves to bring her dog everywhere on trips. And then every time I talk about my kids, she'll counter that with something the dog did that was exactly like what the kids did, which I love dogs, but compared to my mom and my sister, I don't love dogs. They are their lives revolve around their dogs. So my mom would always bring her dog on visits to my house. And my husband's a little bit allergic. It's not life-threatening, but it was discomfort. And then the entire day would revolve around the dog, and everything was about the dog. And I would get annoyed, and my mom would be totally focused on the dog, and it was just not a good dynamic. So at one point, I told my mom, like, we're not gonna like have you bring the dog this time. You know, you can't bring the dog. Sorry, this is just, you know, I use the allergies as the main reason, but it was a number of reasons. And it was, she was really upset for like a month. And then she just got over it. And now she comes without her dog. My husband is a lot happier. And I'm a lot happier, and she's actually a lot happier. And so it's strange because I wanted to be accommodating, giving, you know, I wanted to like adapt, be generous of spirit and say, hey, she wants her dog here, that makes her happy. Her dog is like her child, I'm gonna let her bring her dog. But instead, I said no. And because I said no, it created a different environment. It was like it broke the karmic pattern in a way. I mean, not really on a deep level, I don't know, but I know that it extricated me from that pattern and allowed me to just be like more relaxed with her. So it's kind of a silly example, but I think that sometimes we have to like say no, even though we want to be generous, in order to create a space. And a metaphor that I have for that is like, it's like a leaking boat. You know, it's like when you allow things to come to you, like the Buddha was saying, you know, when you accept people's negativity and stuff like that, it's like a boat that's leaking, and like you're in this leaky boat, it's sinking, and you can't get any peace. You're always struggling. But if you can block the holes, which is like to me the nose or whatever it might be for you, you create a dry space, you know, a dry, safe, tranquil space where you can be in peace in that situation with that person. And that's how I look at it. So that was one of the things that I thought was really, you know, creating boundaries is something that I think we can all have our own versions of that. And it could also be that we're crossing boundaries, right? That we're the person that's getting upset and shouting, and that's also something to take into account and just to withdraw that, like to respect other people's boundaries, right? So when we think about the teaching of karma, that's something I could talk about for hours, but there is, you know, in some schools of Buddhism believe that the Buddha attained enlightenment in the span of one lifetime, and others believe that he attained it over many lifetimes. I tend to think that when we deal with situations and we go deeply into situations, we are on a path, we're purifying, you know, that thing comes to us so we can work that out. That just resonates with me. Not all Buddhists would say that, but I think I agree with the ones that do. You deal with a situation, you move on. You know, once you really work on it, it's like purification. Do we say then, okay, well, whatever's happening to me is my fault? No. Like, is what's happening to you your fault? No, that's not the intended interpretation of it, because then it would be easy to say, oh, this person has all these problems because they did things to deserve that in a past life, right? And that's not the right interpretation of it, because something terrible could happen to us 1 second from now, and then we just don't know what huge amount of like unexpressed karma we might have. So we can't judge things on the surface, you know. Or this person might be in their last lifetime just getting rid of the last little things, and it looks like they've got a lot of problems, but they're actually like on the verge of enlightenment. Like, we cannot judge, right? So I think it's interesting. And when I think, and the last thing about that is that when you think about like the teaching of rebirth, the goal is not to be reborn, and that's something that's just like foreign to us. I remember when I was living in India for a few months, a friend from Kansas City came and she said, well, I said, I think I understand why people don't want to be reborn, like what it is, like it's because there's something, this is death compared to awakening. Like what we think of as life is actually death compared to nirvana, compared to that everything we love is coming from a place that's not the conditional world, you know. And she was like, well, I like my life and I do want to come back, you know, and I can understand that. Like, that's how I grew up. It's a very different worldview, but I think we should understand that the word nirvana, which means snuffing out, it doesn't, like putting out a candle, it's the same word. It doesn't mean that snuffing out of all that's good. It means the cooling of the negativity, that the fire is a metaphor that he uses a lot, the Buddha uses a lot, like everything is on fire, on fire, on fire. It just cools it. And then you find someone like the Buddha who attained nirvana, let's say, he was present, he was engaged, he was wise, he was like, you know, he wasn't like this disengaged, like nihilistic person. In nirvana, how did he look? Deeply individual, deeply compassionate, deeply wise, and I think that's how it looks. So I think just to have an understanding of that, that is what Buddhism's goal is. So just the takeaways, when we're going into family situations, what can we take away from this? I think to, first of all, think this thing about karma and rebirth, it's just a sketch. It's not an absolute thing. It's something that might be useful, right? To think we can be grateful. Like this is a coming together with these people has a deep purpose. One of the things the Buddha said is your enemies are your greatest teachers. It has a deep purpose. Why are you here with these people? Why are you going through these things? To have compassion, like I've been in your shoes, you've been in my shoes, we've been related many times before. Your negativity, my negativity, it's coming from a place of fear, right? It's coming from a place of uncertainty, right? And to know that we're all in the same situation, impermanence, right? This too shall pass. Whatever is going on is not going to last forever. The value of staying in a situation, you might have difficult relationships and say, I'm leaving, that's it. I'm not going to deal with this. I don't think that's the solution. I think you are with that person to work that thing out. Of course, there are situations where you have to leave, but I think to stay has a lot of value if it's not a dangerous or abusive situation. But setting boundaries, as we said, it's a way of not accepting that negativity. And also, I think there's like an aspect of like, because it's so deep and profound, and I'll wrap it up here, it's like sometimes, you just have to say like, I can't do this. And what we were chanting earlier, Namu Amida Butsu, that's a thing that you hear. I chanted that a lot in Japan, and you hear older people say that when they're in a difficult situation. They'll just say like, Namu Amida Butsu. Amida is the Buddha of infinite life and infinite light that's within you as well as without. So it's sort of like, I can't, like help, just like help. Like you can call on the deepest part of yourself. It's not separate from you, but it's a deep reserve of wisdom and patience. I just like sometimes just say like, help, I cannot do this, help, That's a big part of East Asian Buddhism, that attitude. We don't tend to adopt it as much here. And that's it, I think, and also just that, to know that situations elicit emotions from us, but they're not causing those emotions, that the things that they're eliciting are coming from us, and we can get to a deeper place where love and compassion is what we bring forth in every situation, and not just when it's easy. And then just one more last thing. When you're going into a difficult situation, I would say it's good to prepare, meditate beforehand, dress comfortably. Like if I'm wearing uncomfortable clothes, I get really frustrated. And then like in the like I think if you can just know that you're going to encounter difficulty and prepare yourself, that's a positive thing. And then lastly, you can send people, in addition to being with your emotions, send them light. You can breathe in their negativity. You can breathe in sorrow and breathe out light. Send them light. There are lots of different ways to do that. You can breathe up light through your body, exhale through the chakras, and then create a circle of light around that person, And I think that that's a good thing to do that counters negativity. There's a lot more to say about it, but those things have helped me. So I wish you like a very happy holiday season, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you.